Without further ado, let's give the floor to Derek here.
All right. Well, thank you. Hi, everybody. I know many of you, it seems like. My name's Derek Nishino, and I am I still call myself a SharePoint consultant because that is primarily the platform that I work with. But with the move to Microsoft 365 and then the advent of things that integrate really closely with SharePoint Online, like Power Apps and Power Automate, for example, of course, I'm expanding my offerings. So I've been working with SharePoint since summer of 2002. So for quite a while, and I've seen it go through a lot of different changes. One of the things that has always made me just kind of shake my head, and if you have any experience with SharePoint, you may have run into this as well. There isn't a good way to do cascading dropdowns, or I should say, Microsoft doesn't provide an out-of-the-box way to do cascading dropdowns in SharePoint. But now with Power Apps, we have a method for doing cascading dropdowns, and it isn't very painful. And so that's what I'm going to be talking about today. If you're not familiar with what a cascading dropdown is, a cascading dropdown is, imagine you have two dropdowns, and whatever you pick in the first dropdown will filter and affect the choices that are available in the second dropdown. The scenario I'm going to talk about today is actually a scenario that is kind of a light version of what I built for myself in my own SharePoint tenant to manage my clients' projects and then the time that I spend on each project. So I have a data model. It's a very simple data model that looks like this. I have a clients list, and if you're not familiar with SharePoint, there's this thing called a list. You can think of it as an Excel table on steroids or as a lightweight database table, whichever way you would like to think of it. So you have rows of data, and then you have columns for different information, that goes into each row. So I have a clients list where I keep client contact and whether or not the client is active. I have a projects list where I keep the client, project name, hours, and whether or not the project is active. And then I have my time entry list where I want to pull. Actually, there's more than this, but I want to have a client name, a project name, and hours. Now, one of the things that we can do in a SharePoint list is we can do something called a lookup. We can have a lookup column that pulls information out of one list and makes it available in another list. So and those are really easy to set up. They've been around in SharePoint for a very long time. And so oops, I keep getting notifications. Oops, did I not share? Crap, sorry, folks. Amateur hour over
Good
here.
catch. Thank you. We're about to find out.
Total
Thank
amateur
you.
hour. So let me go over this again. Thank you, whoever sent me that message. So here's my data model. Can you guys see my screen now?
Yes, we can.
Yes, we
Okay,
can.
good. All right, sorry about that. So my data model, I have a clients list where I have client contact and whether or not the client's active. I have my projects list with client, project name, the hours that are available on the project and whether or not the project is active. And then my time entry list with client, project name, hours. And I think I also have date in there, but forgot to add it to my little diagram here. So the lookups I was talking about is to fill in the drop-down choices, or in Power Apps, the combo box choices, in the projects table and in the time entry tables. We actually pull that information from the client field in the clients list, okay? And then to pull the available projects, we just do a lookup to the project name list. So here's what this looks like in SharePoint. So here's my clients list. So I have my clients. I have, obviously, this is just basic contact info and whether or not the client is active, okay? And then for my projects list, I have my client, project name, hours, the hours billed, it was for a different demo, and then active. And so we can have more than one project per customer, right? And so that's what we're seeing here. Like I have these two projects going, three projects going with Cogsley's Cogs. Some of the projects are active. Actually, only one project is inactive. And one of the nice things about using lookup columns in SharePoint is that you have referential integrity with your lookup columns. So if I want to see the information about a particular client, I can just click on that client name, and SharePoint will bring up the list item that stores all of the data that I have for that client. And what's really cool about this is that you get all of this without writing any code whatsoever. It's all straight out of the box with SharePoint. Now on to what we're doing today. This is my time entry list. I called it Time Entry 2021 because I've given this presentation a few times, and I've already used time entry as a list name. So here we have the client, date, hours, and project name. Actually, I want project name over here, so I'm just going to rearrange that real quick. Now, when I go to add a new time entry, I could put in whatever, discovery phase 1, and I can pick from my clients, but notice that both my active and inactive clients are being shown in this list. And that's kind of suboptimal because we don't really want to allow people to select inactive clients because it would just be it would be bad data. But where things really start to get confusing is when I go to project name. And so here I have a couple of different projects called approval workflow, a couple of projects called SPO migration for SharePoint Online migration. And so the question becomes, which of these entries matches up with the correct client? And so what we're going to do is do a cascading dropdown using Power Apps. So we're going to replace this list form with the Power Apps form. And I'm going to show you how we can show only the active clients and then cascade the client choice to show only the active projects for that client. Okay. Any questions so far? No. Okay, fantastic. Let's see, I think that's all there is a simple method for doing this. If you don't care about saying, saying that the project or the client was active, and if you don't care about referential integrity, there's a very simple way to do cascades that Microsoft offers in Power Apps. This is the link to it. I can make this slide deck available after the presentation. But what I have found generally is that having that referential integrity is important to people. And then there's also some other advantages with lookup columns. So for example, if I were to change the name of one of my clients, so if I changed Contoso to Contoso Inc., in the simplified method that Microsoft offers, you would end up with invalid data because it wouldn't track that change. When you use lookup columns in SharePoint, that change is tracked because what SharePoint is actually doing under the hoods is it's looking at the unique ID for each row in the list and using that information when it displays the field in the lookup column. And you will see some of that when we get into our Power App, which we're going
Derek,
to do.
we got a quick question in the chat. Could you show the list settings?
Which list?
It sounds like any of those SharePoint lists. Or Fernando, feel free to add some more information if you're looking for something specific.
Well, all of them, please.
Yeah, sorry, I'm not. I wasn't paying attention to the. Sure. So I'll show the list settings for time entry. If there's something specific you want to see. So here we can see the title field, and you get a title field with every list in SharePoint. And then we have the client field, which is a lookup, and the project name field, which is a lookup, and then a date field, of course, and then hours. So this is the hours we're going to record as just a number. Is there anything else you wanted me to show?
I think that's
great. Thanks.
Yeah, sure. No problem. Okay, so let's go ahead and get into Power Apps. Now, I will say, first of all, that I don't put myself out there as an end-all be-all Power Apps expert. I bet there are people on this call that know Power Apps better than me. So if you see something in this presentation, please go ahead and speak up if you think there's a way to do something better or more correctly. I think that's an important part of user group presentations is the interactivity with the group. So here I am at my with my Power Apps design surface. And so the first thing I'm going to do is notice that I have a field that we don't want, which is attachments. So with a SharePoint list, you can attach files to a list item. I don't need that field, so I'm just going to go ahead and remove that. But what I do want to add is my client field and my project name field. So let's go ahead and add that. So there's client and then project name. Yeah. Yeah, let's just go ahead and put these up here. Okay, so far so good. And then the next thing I need to do is that in order to pull data into Power Apps from my SharePoint lists, I have to add the lists as a data source. Right. So let's go to, oops. Let's go to data, and we'll add data from SharePoint. And so Power Apps will suggest some sites that I've used recently. So this is the site that I want to pull the data from. Oops, it looks like there's something flashing. Did somebody ask another question? No? Okay. Let's see. So we're going to want the clients list and the projects list. So we're just going to go ahead and connect those into our Power App. Okay. So that's done. Excuse me. And so now one of the things that I always like to do when I'm working with data from SharePoint is to create collections out of the lists that I'm using as data sources. So we're going to do that next. There are a number of reasons to do that. I believe it's a best practice. The reason I do it, or I started doing this, is because there are delegation issues with certain field types and certain operators. And so I was constantly getting delegation warnings, so I just started creating collections. So the best way that I found, or the best place I found to create those collections, is on your form screen. Now, I know that if I was building this app for a client in a production environment, I would have come in before doing anything else, and I would have renamed form screen 1, screen 1, and form 1, and all of these other things, so that they were well named. But since we only have an hour here for me to work in, and I wanted to start completely from scratch, I haven't done that. So let's go to form screen 1. And then in the on visible action, this is where we're going to create our collections. And for this, I'm just going to copy paste. I'll type most everything else, but I'll just paste this in. Did not paste very well, did it? Okay, there we go. So I'm creating 2 collections. One of them is clients, and I know that a lot of people I see use collect or collection in front of the name of their collections. I use local. That's just my own personal idiosyncrasy, because I think of the data as being local to the Power App as opposed to working directly with the list in SharePoint. But I create 2 collections. Clear collect will create the collection, and then local clients is the name, and then clients is the name of the data connection. Remember, we added clients and projects as data connections. And then I just create another one. So clear collect local projects, and then we're connecting local projects to the projects list. All right. Hopefully that is clear so far.
Now, does that just create a single column table?
What's that?
Does that just create a single column table in the collection?
No, what that is doing, it is actually, that's a good question. It is actually grabbing all of this.
Okay.
Yep. It's grabbing everything. And we need it to, so that I can use the active field to display to determine whether or not I'm going to display something.
Got it.
Yep. Okay. So let's go ahead and let's work with the client field first. I'll zoom in a bit. So in client, what we're going to want to do is populate this dropdown with the client column from my clients list, right? So let's unlock the properties to change it. And then we need to go down to the items. So items, so this this property items determines what actually are the options are within this particular combo box. And I apologize if I say drop down instead of combo box. Drop down is the way SharePoint people typically refer to a combo box. So just try to, equate those two. So let's go ahead and change that. We're going to blow all of this away. And remember, so normally I could do just, say local clients and then set some fields over here in display fields. And I would get the list of clients from my SharePoint list. But what I really want to do is filter my clients list so that I only display active clients. So to do that, we're just going to use the good old filter function on local clients. And then we're going to just say active. Remember, I have active as one of my fields. And in fact, as I start typing, the IntelliSense offers up my active field equals true. Now, normally we'd say, oh, it's that easy, but there's one more thing that you have to do. You have to look at the display fields and search fields properties of the combo box. The display fields being the most important, display fields actually determines what is displayed in the dropdown. And notice that by default, it's set to compliance asset ID. That is not what we want. What we actually want in this case is a field called title. So I'm going to set that for both. The reason we want title is that in my clients list, so in this list, we're trying to grab the stuff in the client column, but in SharePoint, we have the concept of an internal column name and then a display name. You might recall that earlier I said that every SharePoint list comes by default with a column called title. A very, very common thing to do in SharePoint is to reuse that title column for something else. And in this case, that is exactly what has happened here. I have renamed my title column to client, but in Power Apps, I still have to use the original column name of title. And so if any of you are ever working with SharePoint and you're not seeing a column that you think should be there, you'll want to go and check to see if the column was originally named something else, because that is exactly what's happening here. So I can't type in client here. I have to type in title.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
Is it best practice to leave that title column alone and work with everything else so you don't run into situations like that?
No, I don't know. I think different people have different opinions. I see it happen so much, and I've known so many SharePoint folks that do this. It's just common. And so it's kind of a reflex action for those of us that work with SharePoint all the time to say, oh, I wonder if they renamed the column. I'll show you a really easy way to determine if you think the column's been renamed. You can go to your gear menu and go to list settings. So on your list, go to list settings, and then just kind of roll over the column. And why isn't it displaying? Okay, so you can, if you look at the URL that just popped up at the bottom, at the very end it says and field equals title.
Yep.
So that lets me know.
Okay. Thank
what
you.
about just hiding that title field as an option and then just not using it?
Yeah, you absolutely can do that for sure. Yes, you can. But like I said, it's really, really common to just rename it. So it's something to look out for in case it ever pops up.
Yeah, we've felt your pain for sure.
There's another question here in the chat.
Okay.
Is it the same to say active equals true than active equals yes?
I don't know that yes works. It's been a while since I experimented with this. I missed a space.
I think it would be one, if anything.
Yeah, so would I. I don't think that yes, no. So yes isn't going to work. It should one may or may it should. Although I've worked with people that the 1-1-0 thing worked for, and some that it didn't. I have found that true is pretty reliable for me.
Okay, yeah, true is definitely the way to go.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and save this. And I'm going to show you another SharePoint. I don't know if it's a SharePoint idiosyncrasy. Maybe you folks can tell me. But when I go to preview this form, oh, no item to display. And so this, the first time I was worked with Power Apps, this kind of puzzled me. So I had to go for a web search. By default, Power Apps tries to use the first item in a list as the default data when you preview the app. In my case, in my time entry list, I have no data. Right, so this is just something that you have to do when working with Power Apps and SharePoint. Is you have to just you just have to create something if you don't have a row of information yet. Okay. So now I might have to back out. Yeah. So let's see. Let's refresh this. Let's see if that gets. There we go. So now when I preview the app, oh, come on. I'm going to back out. I have found that I'm going to publish and back out. I have found that sometimes when you first set up collections and connect to external data between Power Apps and SharePoint, that sometimes you have to back out and then re-enter the Power App. Does stuff like this happen with Power Apps, with working with other data sources in everybody else's experience, or is SharePoint just a problem child?
I know Jamie will have something to say about that.
I mean, seeded apps are slightly different for sure. So yeah, you could have some issues that you're having, but you know.
Yeah. So, but fortunately now when I preview, so my Dropdown is working, and notice that I am just getting 4 clients back, and that is because Spacely Sprockets and ABC Co are inactive. So my active filter is working, and I'm only showing the 4 clients that are active. Okie doke. So now let's get to kind of the harder part, which is the project name. So we're going to do much the same thing. Oh, actually, you know what? I was going to do this. I like things sorted. So I'm just going to go ahead and sort my client dropdown on, let's see, I'm going to sort on title. I'm looking at my notes right now, so actually I should go just to the title. So that should work. Let's take a look. Okay, there we go. Yes, it worked, and everything's nicely sorted now. So now let's go ahead and look at the project name field. So for project name, oh, and also one of the things I like to do, and probably everybody else in the world, is I like to save, publish to SharePoint, and then go and make sure it's actually working in SharePoint. I have had things occur where they seem to be working correctly in the preview, but then when I get back to SharePoint, it isn't working correctly. I've also noticed that it can take a few seconds for changes in Power Apps to sync down into the SharePoint interface. So let's see if, oh, okay, that happened pretty quickly this time. So here we have our client dropdown, and you can see that the project name dropdown is still has the additional entries that we don't want. So let's go ahead, let's go and fix that. So here in the, let's unlock the properties, make sure I'm in the items field. I am. So here we're going to start with the filter again, and we're going to look at our local projects collection, right? So remember the local projects collection holds this table of data, or this list of data that has all of our projects. And so then what we want to do is we want to filter our project information based on the client. So we want to say that the client, we want to filter local projects where client value from the client dropdown, I'm sorry, the value in the client value in our projects table is equal to the value that was selected in our client dropdown. So the value in the client dropdown is going to be data card value 4. Better spells in 4. And then we're going to say dot selected. So we're going to look at whatever was actually selected. And then that's going to actually return a row of data from us. It's actually going to return a record. And so what we then want to get down to is the actual field that we want to filter on, which is the client field, but I have to use the internal name of title. Okay, so now if I have done this correctly and I haven't made any typos, I need to remember to come over to my properties. And notice display fields is also compliance asset ID. And so we need to set that to title and search fields. Okay, now if I've done everything correctly, hopefully we will have a cascade. So if I pick Cogsley Cogs, so Acme, and I get SP, the 2016 deployment and approval workflow. And so let's go look at my projects for Acme. And that is correct. Those are the two.
Awesome.
Yep. And then, of course, we can also update this. Forgot to put in the part of the filter. We can do a double filter, so I can filter on both active equals true and my other filter for getting the cascade. And so now if I look at who has an inactive, so Cogsley Cogs has an inactive project of facilities form. So if this all works correctly, then when I hit Cogsley Cogs, did I not update my?
That looks good. There's 2 there.
Oh yeah, you're right. Yep, nope, yep, that's correct. So we were only expecting 2, and that is what we were seeing, the 2 active projects. Okay, so that wasn't too bad, but we're not out of the woods yet. Let me show you why. Let's go ahead and publish this thing to SharePoint. And let's go hit our list and refresh. I always do a shift refresh. I find that's the most reliable way to make sure I'm working with the recently published, most recently published version of the Power App. So let's see if our, so let's put something in here. Client, org. Okay, so it must not have synced down yet. Try that again. So client, there we go. Okay, so now my cascade is working. All right. So now if I save this, and I'm just going to put some data in here so we have a real item. So we're 5 hours. I hit save and watch what happens. We didn't get the data saved in the client column or in the project name column. Does anybody want to hazard a guess as to why this is? Okay, it's unless you're kind of deep into SharePoint, it's not the kind of thing you would likely know. If you'll recall earlier when I was talking about lookup columns, I mentioned that SharePoint tracks that data based on the ID in the list that the item is coming from, as well as the display value. And so the way that looks to SharePoint is like this. Oh, no, that's not the right one. where is, I had a slide on ID and value pairs. Oh, here we go. So the way that SharePoint stores a lookup, the data for a lookup column internally is with ID, which is a unique ID that is assigned to each row of a list or of a table, and then hashtag and the display value. So in other words, when I pick Acme, SharePoint might be representing it as 3 semicolon hashtag Acme. But what has happened when when I created the choices for that dropdown, I broke this. All I'm showing is the Acme or the Cogsley Cogs or the Contoso. I'm not actually including the data for about which row in the clients table that data came or that Acme came from. And so we have to restore that information, or we have to create that information in order to return that to SharePoint correctly when we do our submit. And so the way we do that is by creating a record. So we create a record that has ID and then the ID of the client in the clients table, and then the value, whatever the display value is. This part can be confusing. Did I explain that sufficiently? Not hearing any complaints.
I think it's all good.
Yeah,
Okay.
good.
Okay, cool. So let's go ahead and do that. It's pretty straightforward to do. Have any of you working with other systems run into this where you're expected to return some kind of a record as opposed to just like a line of text and you stumbled on it? No?
Wraps.
Okay, so let's go ahead and fix this. So in my client, for my client field, did somebody have a comment or a question? No? Okay. So in client, it's actually at the data card. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm incorrect. First, what we have to do is on the actual combo box in the on change, we're going to use the on change action or event to create the record for client, right? So on change fires whenever the field has been changed. So it's the logical place to do it. And let's see. So as you probably know, since this is the Power Platform group, we use set create a record. So I just preface mine with record, and so this is my client record. And now in squirrely brackets, I start creating the actual record. So remember from my slide, SharePoint is expecting an ID and a value. So that's exactly what we're going to give it. We're going to give it capital I, lowercase d. This is really super important in SharePoint, or in this case for SharePoint, you have to use capital I, lowercase d. Otherwise, you'll be unsuccessful. And so then we just want let's see, client was data card value 4. So we want to grab whatever was selected. If I could type or spell. Whatever was selected in my client dropdown. And then we want to pass, I hit dot, and notice I have a bunch of options because remember, we were returning entire rows of data from our client and projects lists. And so I have all of the columns from those lists available. But in our case, we want ID. And in this case, where we used uppercase I, lowercase d here, we have to use uppercase I, uppercase d here.
Did
all right?
I think we may have taken selected items instead of selected.
Oh, you did. Thank you for catching that. I did. I was a little too quick on the
Drop down. Yep.
Yep, a little too quick. Thank you for catching that. Let's see. Okay, so we have that, and so now we do comma, and now we're just going to we're going to select the value, and so that's going to be very much. This is going to be there here again. Data card value 4. Let me get my mouse out of the way. Got it selected. Got the right one that time. And now we're going to pick, remember that client name field is actually under the covers title. So we're going to use title. And so I am missing, oops, I missed a squirrely bracket. So squirrely bracket and close that up. And that should work. I'm just going to go ahead and save and publish. I have to make one more change before it'll actually come into effect. Now that I've created the record, in the data cards, in the data cards update property, instead of this default, so whatever was selected, because remember that's not going to give us the record we want, here I just put in like the record I just created, so the client record. So that should do it. Let's go ahead and test that real quick. Okay. I'm going to give this a few refreshes just to make sure I got or that we're working with the latest published version of my app. And so I can just edit this item and see if I can add yeah, so notice it did populate the existing data. So let's pick bOrg and save. Okay, so here, boom, we have success. We now have that column successfully populated. And so what I can do now that I know that what I did was correct, I can just go back into my Power App, go to my project combo box and do a very similar thing, right? So we are going to go into the onChange event, and I'm going to type it out since my notes don't match up exactly with what the naming conventions I used here. So set record project, comma. So here's where we create the record. So ID, and so project was data card value 5. Dot selected dot ID. So here again, we're just mirroring what we did for the client dropdown, but just using a different data card. 5 dot selected dot, and in this case, my project name field is just called project name. So I can just select, I just do this, boom, project name. Let's close that up. So that is hopefully correct. And now we go to the actual data card, and we are going to change the update value to our project record. Okay. Publish. All right, let's give it a few good refreshes, and then let's see if this works. Okay. All right. Now I'm gonna have to reselect this to trigger the change. There we go. Save. Okay, boom. And so we've now done successful cascades. You can do multiple levels of cascades. Hopefully the techniques that I've shown you here are useful to you, even if you're not working with SharePoint. I know there's lots of different systems that people work with Power Apps, and so hopefully there's some applicability from what I've shown you. Ready to open up for additional questions if there are any.